If you're looking to improve your performance with volleyball on the court, off the court, improve your recovery times, just become a better, more effective athlete overall, then we need to talk about the role that nutrition, hydration, and supplementation plays in becoming a good volleyball athlete. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into a lot of things that I recommend on those fronts and hopefully give you guys some good information that you can use to take your volleyball game to the next level. Really quick, my name is Greg. I go by the Volleyball Strength Coach. I train volleyball athletes all the way up from 12 years old up to the professional level for beach and for indoor, and I train athletes online and in person. I've been playing volleyball for over 20 years myself and even played up to the Division I level in college. And now I am a strength conditioning coach, and I have been for over 10 years, and I work specifically with volleyball athletes only. And really quick, before we get into this, I am not a registered dietitian. I am not a doctor. I am a certified nutrition coach. But if you're really struggling with nutrition, or if you want the best information on nutrition, go find a registered dietitian to work with, okay? Reach out to them, find someone, ideally a sports dietitian. I'm here to just give you advice based on my experience and my personal experience, my experience working with clients, but I am not a registered dietitian. If you want better information, go talk to one of them. As we get into this, we just have to kind of define some terms and make sure that we're on the same page and that you understand everything that we're talking about when we get into these. So the first thing is the term macronutrients. And if you don't know what macronutrients are, those are essentially carbs, fat, and protein. It's basically the things that we consume that have calories. Alcohol is technically a macronutrient, and then there's an argument for water being a macronutrient. We're not going to worry about those today. Today we're going to talk about carbs, fat, and protein. When you hear people say the word macros, that's what they are talking about. There's also something called micronutrients, which is things like vitamins and minerals. We'll get into a little bit of that today, but just want to make sure that we're on the same page with what these terms are. And we're going to go through each one of those, the macros, and I'm going to explain why each one of them is beneficial, what they do, and then relate them back to why you need to pay attention to those for volleyball. So the first macronutrient is carbohydrates, also called carbs. And this is going to be one of the most important things that you need for energy and overall performance for volleyball. So carbohydrates are your main fuel source for short to medium term exercise, which a lot of volleyball is just repetitive, short to medium term duration of exercise. And it's very important that you have an adequate intake of carbohydrates so you can perform to the highest level for this. So carbohydrate sources would be things like fruit, rice, oatmeal, pasta, like these type of carb sources that are going to provide you with energy. And I'll give you some examples of my favorite ones as we go. But like I said, this is your short-term energy. This is some of your more explosive energy when you're, in a single game or point by point. This is the major fuel source you're using to be athletic in these events. Okay, we'll talk about fat in a little bit. That's going to be your longer duration fuel source. But for the most part, carbs are what your body is going to be running on at the highest level when you're playing volleyball. So we need a high intake of carbohydrates. We're getting out of the world of people being afraid of carbs for the most part, especially for athletic performance. Of course, there's always some variability in, people say that they did keto and still were successful with athletics. But for the most part, the most successful athletes in this type of kind of energy expenditure are going to be ones that eat a high carbohydrate diet. So just some general timing and amount recommendations for carbs. For the most part, for the average athlete, you just want to eat balanced meals all throughout the day. So each meal should have some carbs, some fat, some protein, and probably some veggies. Unless you're a really high level athlete or you're getting really down detailed into like a deep, just cutting phase of your nutrition, you can just stay balanced throughout the day, highly recommended. But I do recommend a good amount of carbohydrates before you go do your practice or your tournament or even your lift. So within an hour or 2 hours of the event, just eat a full, complete meal, just a regular meal. But then what I like to do is either directly on the way or directly before, eat an additional amount of carbohydrates of something that is a more simple carbohydrate source, so basically more sugary, right? Something that you can make sure that when you get on the court, you have a lot of carbohydrates stored in your body, stored in your muscle, stored in your bloodstream, so that you can use those for immediate energy when you go on to do whatever that athletic endeavor is. And if we're really looking at recovery, so say you have another match later or you're at a 2-day tournament and you have another match the next day, you have to make sure that you're refueling with carbs to get that energy back into your system. Okay, something I should have explained earlier is there's a few places where carbohydrates are stored in our body. They are stored in the liver as glycogen, they are stored in our muscles as glycogen, and then they just exist in our bloodstream. And when we're doing athletic events, we are going to use the carbohydrates that are just in our bloodstream first. we are going to go to our muscle glycogen second. And then if we have to, which at this point you're probably not still playing, your performance would have greatly suffered by this point, our liver glycogen last. So we want to make sure that we have a good amount just in our bloodstream ready to use super fast, which is the carbs right before, a good amount where our muscles are full of glycogen when we get into, use through that blood sugar and have to get into that secondary source, which is why we eat carbohydrates throughout the day so our muscle glycogen can stay full. And then we have the fuel that we need to make it through an event, but we also need to replenish that directly afterwards so that for our next athletic event, we can be ready and prepared to perform again. If you're someone who at tournaments, maybe you play a little bit worse throughout the day, or you just don't feel ready from one match to the next or one day to the next, then there's a chance that you haven't eaten enough carbohydrates to refuel the stores you need to perform at your highest level. So a few examples that I really like, these are just personally from what I eat. Before I play volleyball, I really like to eat an oatmeal bowl. So it's oats, blueberries, chia seeds, hemp seeds, honey, and peanut butter. And I will eat that before pretty much every single time I play volleyball, whether it's in the morning for 6 a.m. practice, if it's a tournament, it's the first thing I eat, and sometimes I bring another one of those with me, or if I'm just going to, a later league match or something like that later in the day, I will always eat that before I go play. It's a good combination of slower digesting carbohydrates through the oatmeal and some faster digesting carbohydrates through things like the honey. Another go-to for me is bananas and just fruit in general. I mentioned blueberries already. You kind of want to stay on the lower fiber side of fruits directly before you play. I think bananas are known to be one of the most amazing fuel sources for athletes directly before athletic events. So a lot of times I'll have my oatmeal bowl ahead of time, and then even on the way or when I get to volleyball, I will have a banana ready and just eat that then. A go-to tournament fuel for me is rice cakes with peanut butter and honey. And then I recently also started doing rice cakes with peanut butter and jelly, where again, we're just getting carbs into the system. And that's something that I'll eat on tournament days, local tournaments where you're playing 4, 5, 6 matches a day. That's a great in-between that I use all the time. So just in conclusion from carbohydrates, don't be afraid of them. They are one of your best friends when it comes to athletic performance, and you do need to eat a high amount of carbohydrates to perform at your highest levels. And if you're struggling with performance, then you may need to track your food for a little bit, see what your carbohydrate intake actually is, and potentially increase from there. Next thing we're going to talk about is protein, and protein is how your muscles are going to recover from anything that you do, weightlifting, volleyball, these type of things that require your body to fix itself. So for the most part, anything you can touch on your body is made of protein, and obviously that includes your muscles and things like your tendons. And so we need to make sure that we're getting an adequate protein intake so our body has the units it needs to rebuild things like our muscles or our skins or whatever. If we have an injury, we have to be able to physically rebuild our bodies, and we need to intake protein to do that. So with protein, there's things called complete proteins, which are protein sources that have all of the essential amino acids that we do not produce on our own. We do need to intake those from other sources. So we want to eat these complete protein sources as often as we can to make sure we're getting those adequate protein levels. There are also things called incomplete proteins, which are protein sources that don't have all 9 essential amino acids, but we can actually combine some of those together with other incomplete protein sources to create then a complete protein source. One example that I always recommend is combining beans and rice together can create a complete protein source. So again, the main role of this from a volleyball perspective is recovery. We do want to eat a pretty high amount of protein to make sure we are recovering from a bunch of volleyball and a bunch of weight training, but there are some other benefits to it that make it really beneficial for things like fat loss or if you're in a weight loss phase. Like, for example, protein is the most satiating of the 3 macronutrients, which means it helps you feel the most full. Eating an equivalent amount of steak and an equivalent amount of rice, you're not going to feel the same level of fullness. So if you are trying to lose some fat, then eating a higher amount of protein will help you feel more full, and it will be easier to do that. There's also the benefit of the thermic effect of food, where with protein, depending on the source you're eating, you can burn up to 33% of the calories you eat just by having to digest and absorb the protein. Protein is a lot harder for us to digest, and so it requires more energy to do that. from a fat loss perspective, that's a pretty good thing. It allows us to eat the same amount but end up burning actually a higher amount of calories directly from digesting our food. The other kind of downside of that is the fact that protein is a bit harder to digest, is that we need to be a little bit smarter with our timing. You don't want to eat protein directly before some kind of athletic event. Even for some reason, people are still doing protein shakes and protein bars like right before they go to do something athletic like lift or something like that, thinking that it's like giving them some kind of energy or some kind of recovery, but you're just not going to adequately digest that through a workout. And it's really just going to kind of sit in your gut, maybe not make you feel so great until later when you can be a bit more relaxed. So you want to eat protein at a time when it's okay that you can, be relaxed, not going and doing some kind of athletic event. If you go and do a walk or something like that, that can be a little bit beneficial, but nothing like high intensity activity. You do want to keep this, for the most part, like carbs, spread pretty well throughout your day, but definitely try to get a high amount of protein right after you do your workout or whatever your athletic event is. But just for the sake of satiation and staying full and just health in general, it is the most beneficial, technically, to eat pretty balanced throughout the day. I've experimented with things like eating all of my protein in the evening, and I actually did okay with that because it allows you to be very relaxed and just like kind of let you go to bed. It can make you feel kind of sleepy before or after you eat all of that protein, but I've done just as well by spacing out my protein all throughout the day, which is the best recommendation for most people. Just keep it even throughout the day. So my go-to examples for this, I eat a combination of eggs and egg whites basically every day. This is going to be things like chicken, fish, red meat. All of these type of things are going to be your protein sources, like animal-based proteins. Obviously, there's some vegetarian-based options as well. The best options for protein are just the animal-based options, and that's based on bioavailability, digestibility, the amount of total food you need to consume to get your protein in. And then if you need to, like if you just can't eat the amount of protein you need, you're struggling with that, you can supplement with protein shakes or protein bars, assuming that they are high quality and something that your body can digest adequately. A lot of times with like cheap protein sources, people struggle to properly digest them. And last of the three macronutrients is fat. And fat is going to be beneficial for two reasons. One, it is your long duration energy sources. So for certain things like really long volleyball matches or just long days of volleyball in general, you're going to be tapping into some of the fat that you consume to be used as energy for this. And we're not going to get into all of the physiology of how we do that, but just know fat is going to be good for long-term energy production. And that's what we use. Once we kind of get to the point where we can use fat for energy because it takes longer to kind of break down the fat cells and utilize it, then we do that. The other thing it's really important for is hormones. A lot of our hormones are based on, they're a base of something like cholesterol. For example, testosterone. You need to consume cholesterol to be able to produce testosterone accurately. So if you're eating too low of fat, then you're not going to be consuming enough cholesterol to produce testosterone, and that's going to cause issues. So a lot of our hormones are fat-based, and we need to make sure we're getting just a good intake of fat to be able to produce those adequately. It doesn't need to be a ton, because if we're looking at getting a pretty high protein diet for recovery perspective and getting a pretty high carbohydrate diet for an energy and a performance side of things, then fat might be on a little bit on the lower side, but it just kind of depends. One recommendation I give to people is they can play around with their fat to carb ratios based on how much activity they're doing that day. Higher activity days, you eat a higher amount of carbs and a lower amount of fat. Lower activity days, you eat a higher amount of fat and a lower amount of carbs. Just like carbs are not something to be afraid of, fat is also not something to be afraid of. Fat source is going to matter. We don't want to be eating a bunch of fried foods, but in general, fat is not something that, eating fat will not make you fat, or eating cholesterol will not give you high cholesterol. You have to consume these things for our body to just work properly. They just need to be in the correct amounts. So let's talk about amounts, like total amount of calories, the ratio of carbs, fat, and protein we want to be at to figure out where you should be for that. Okay, so for volleyball, we want to be somewhere between a slight calorie deficit if your goal is weight loss, to neutral to maybe even a slight calorie surplus if your goal is to either gain weight, gain muscle, or to just focus particularly on performance and recovery. A slight calorie surplus is going to be a little bit better for that. So easiest thing to do. Personally, I track all of my food through an app like MyFitnessPal. And what I will do is just set my age, height, weight, set my goal, set my activity level, which you would do based on your volleyball. And then I will adjust the weight loss or weight gain goal according to what my goals are, and then it will set everything up for you from there. Okay, there's a ton of online calculators you can do to figure out how many calories you should be eating. There's some things that are a bit easier, and there are things that are a bit more complicated, but we like to keep it really simple. With my one-on-one clients, I just have them do MyFitnessPal most of the time because it's really easy to walk through from there. When it comes to setting up the macros, there's a couple really simple things that I like to go with. For a lot of people, something like a 40-30-30 works pretty well. This is where you're eating 40% of your calories from carbohydrates, 30% of your calories from protein, and 30% of your calories from fat. And the other option, you can kind of go a little bit of the other direction, which is 50% of your calories from carbohydrates, 30% from protein, and 30% from fat. But really quick, I'm just going to tell you the easiest way to figure it out, what I do with all of my clients through something like MyFitnessPal. It doesn't have to be that app. That's just what I use, and I know how to use it. So first thing I would do if I can change my macros around is I would set my protein somewhere between 0.8 and 1.0 grams per pound of body weight, okay? 0.8 to 1.0 grams per pound of body weight. 0.85 is a good number for athletes. So for me, that ends up somewhere around 195 grams of protein. And based on where my numbers are right now, that is exactly 30% of my total calories. So that's the first thing I would do. I would get my protein somewhere between that 0.8 and 1.0. If I'm being honest, most people are going to be on the lower end, and that is completely fine. We would just start with there. And then from there, you can kind of fill in wherever you want to be. For a weight loss or weight gain perspective, if you have the total calories correctly and the total protein amount correct, the ratio of carbs to fat doesn't actually matter that much. But then when we're looking into performance, like I said earlier, we do want to be higher on the carbohydrate side. So either 40% or 50% of your carbs from, or 40% or 50% of your calories from carbs, and then either 20% or 30% of your calories from fat. The easiest thing to do, if you're not sure what to do, just track where you're at, do a couple baseline days, see where you are, and then you can just make some adjustments based on your performance to fix it from there. A lot of times there's no real hard, fast rules with these type of things. It's essentially figure out where you are right now and then just try to get better from there. So overall, like I said at the beginning, from a performance perspective, from a recovery perspective, your nutrition is one of the most important things you need to focus on. Okay, so if you have just been able to get away with having a mediocre nutrition, or if you just aren't sure why your performance is suffering or aren't sure why your recovery is suffering, take some time, track your calories, see where you're at, track your food, and then we can make some changes from there based on the guidelines that I said earlier. And hopefully you'll find something along the lines that really sticks out to you as something you can change to just improve your performance and improve your recovery in the long run. And really quick, make sure you hit the like button on this video. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel because I'm just going to keep putting out good content like this through the channel. And make sure you follow me on other social medias. It's at Volleyball Strength Coach on Instagram and at Volleyball SC on TikTok. Make sure you follow me on there because I'm putting out content basically every day.